The crash. The night was unusually quiet in the deep wilderness where Lucas lived. His small cabin, hidden in the heart of the forest, was surrounded by towering trees and a thick blanket of darkness. Lucas was used to this peace. It was why he had chosen to live far from the noisy, chaotic world of humans. But tonight, something broke the silence. A sudden flash of light streaked across the sky, followed by a deafening explosion. The ground trembled as a distant crash echoed through the woods. Lucas, startled, rushed to his window. His first thought was that a meteor had fallen nearby, but something about the light felt strange. It pulsed like it was alive, fading and returning in bursts. Curiosity and caution mixed in his mind. Lucas grabbed his flashlight and an old hunting knife, just in case. He stepped out into the cool night air, the scent of burnt wood faintly lingering. The forest was still, as if holding its breath. Even the usual sounds of crickets and owls had gone silent. As Lucas made his way toward the source of the crash, the trees became more twisted, their branches scared as if scorched by fire. The faint glow of red light led him closer. His heart pounded, both from exertion and fear. What could have caused such destruction? Finally, he reached the site. A small crater was carved into the earth, steam rising from its edges. At its center lay something he couldn't comprehend. A sleek, silver pod, no bigger than a car, lay half buried in the dirt. Its surface shimmered, reflecting the moonlight in strange patterns. It didn't look human-made. Lucas's breath caught in his throat. Could this be alien? His thoughts were interrupted by a weak, pained sound. He froze, his flashlight shaking slightly in his hand. The sound came again, soft but unmistakable. It was coming from the pod. Lucas cautiously approached, his knife ready. The pod's side had a large crack, and inside he could see a figure struggling to move. He hesitated. Was this some kind of trick? Could it be dangerous? "Help, please," a voice whispered, barely audible. It wasn't in English, yet somehow Lucas understood the words. Against his better judgment, he reached out and pulled at the cracked panel. With a groan, the metal gave way, and the figure inside tumbled out. It was a girl, or at least she looked like one. Her skin was pale, almost glowing in the dim light, and her hair shimmered like silver threads. But her most striking features were her eyes, glowing red like embers, and the faint, sharp fangs that peeked out when she gasped for air. She was trembling, clutching her side where dark, thick blood oozed from a wound. Lucas stared, unsure of what to do. She was clearly not human, but she didn't seem like a threat. She looked fragile, on the verge of collapse. Her red eyes locked onto his, filled with desperation. "Please, lifeblood," she whispered, her voice weak. "I need it." Lucas frowned, not understanding. "What do you mean? What is lifeblood?" She groaned, her body shuddering. "Blood. Life. Yours." The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. She was asking for his blood. Lucas took a step back, his mind racing. Could he trust her? What if this was some kind of trap? But then he saw her collapse, her body limp against the ground. She looked so small, so helpless. He couldn't just leave her to die. Cursing under his breath, Lucas knelt beside her. "All right, just don't bite me, okay?" he muttered. He pulled out a small first aid kit he always carried on his forest trips and used a sterile blade to make a tiny cut on his palm. Blood pooled in his hand, and he hesitantly brought it to her lips. The effect was immediate. She weakly grabbed his hand, her lips barely brushing his skin as she drank. A faint glow returned to her pale cheeks, and her breathing steadied. Lucas felt a strange warmth spreading from his palm. But it wasn't painful. It was calming. After a few moments, she pulled away, her eyes now softer, less desperate. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lucas stood up, shaking slightly. "You owe me an explanation," he said, trying to sound braver than he felt. "Who are you?" What are you doing here? The girl tried to sit up but winced in pain. Valeria, she said. I ran. They're coming. You're in danger. Lucas's stomach tightened. Who's coming? Her red eyes glimmered with fear. Hunters. They won't stop. Until I'm dead. Or until they destroy everything. Lucas looked around, the reality of the situation sinking in. Whatever had brought her here was just the beginning. And now, he was involved. Secrets in the dark. Lucas stared at the strange girl, no alien, lying weakly on his old couch. Her breathing was shallow, and her glowing red eyes flickered open and closed like dimming lanterns. It had been hours since he dragged her back to his cabin, each step through the forest filled with second-guessing and fear. What had he gotten himself into? Outside, the night deepened, the forest alive with whispers of the unknown. Lucas kept glancing at the window, half expecting something to emerge from the shadows. The girl, Valeria, she had called herself, barely moved, but her words from earlier echoed in his mind. They're coming. You're in danger. He leaned closer to her, trying to make sense of her bizarre situation. All right, Valeria, he said, his voice steady but low. You need to tell me what's going on. Who's after you? Why are you here? For a moment, there was only silence. Then her eyes fluttered open, glowing faintly like embers in a dying fire. You saved me, she said, her voice soft but tinged with gratitude. But you shouldn't have. Lucas raised an eyebrow. You're welcome, I guess. Now explain before I start regretting it. She took a shuddering breath, her hands trembling as she tried to sit up. Lucas moved to help her, but she flinched away. No, don't touch me. It's not safe. Not safe. You already drank my blood. I think we're past the point of boundaries. Valeria winced at his words but didn't argue. I don't belong here, she said finally. I'm from a place far beyond your stars, a world that's gone now. My people, my kind, are predators, hunters. We need life to survive. Blood, energy, whatever form it takes. But she hesitated, her voice cracking. I chose not to live that way. I refused to take innocent lives. Lucas leaned back, trying to process what she was saying. So, you're like some kind of space vampire. A weak smile crossed her lips. That's one way to put it. He folded his arms, still wary. All right, let's say I believe you. What happened to your world? And why are you here? Her eyes darkened, and a shadow of pain crossed her face. My planet was destroyed by war. My people fought over resources, over power, and in the end, we consumed ourselves. I escaped, but they followed me. The hunters, they're a ruthless faction of my kind, mercenaries who track down outliers like me. To them, I'm a traitor, a weakness that needs to be eliminated. Lucas frowned. So they're here, on Earth. Valeria nodded weakly. They won't stop until I'm dead, or until they take everything they want from this planet. Your world has what they need, what they crave. Life, energy, blood. The room seemed to grow colder at her words. Lucas glanced at the window again, his grip tightening around the hunting knife on the table. Why did you come here then? Did you think they wouldn't follow you? Her voice dropped to a whisper. I didn't know where else to go. I thought I could hide, blend in. Your planet is rich with life, but fragile. If they find me, they'll tear through this place like a wildfire. And you. She looked at him, guilt flickering in her glowing eyes. You've put yourself in their path by helping me. Lucas rubbed his temples, frustration bubbling to the surface. Great. So, not only did I save a space vampire, but I also invited intergalactic death squads to my doorstep. Perfect. Valeria's eyes softened, and she tried to reach for his hand but stopped herself. I didn't mean for this to happen. You're brave, Lucas, braver than anyone I've ever met. But now, you're in danger. You have to leave me. Let them find me and spare yourself." Lucas shook his head. "Not a chance. I don't abandon people, alien or otherwise. Besides, you're in no shape to fight them off. You said they're hunters, right? Well, let's see how they handle someone who knows this forest better than anyone." Valeria's eyes widened slightly. You would fight for me, even after knowing what I am." Lucas smirked, though the fear in his gut was real. "I fought off bears, storms, and crazy people out here. What's a few alien bounty hunters?" He grabbed a flashlight and his old rifle, checking it for ammo. "Besides, I've got a few tricks they won't see coming." Valeria looked at him, a flicker of hope breaking through her despair. For the first time, she felt something unfamiliar, trust in a stranger, a human who didn't know her anything but was willing to risk everything. But outside, the forest wasn't silent anymore. Strange sounds echoed through the night. Mechanical hums, heavy footsteps, and the crackle of energy weapons. The hunters had arrived. The hunters arrive. The air outside the cabin crackled with a strange energy, thick and heavy, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Lucas had spent years in these woods, but this was different, unnatural. The night was no longer just dark. It was alive with whispers of danger. Inside the cabin, Valeria sat hunched by the window, her glowing red eyes scanning the shadows. Her pale skin was still too weak to hide the exhaustion creeping through her, but she remained alert. Every flicker of movement outside made her muscles tense. "They're close," she said quietly, her voice edged with fear. "I can feel them." Lucas was pacing, gripping the old rifle he hadn't used in years. His mind raced with plans. He had reinforced the cabin years ago, mostly to keep out bears or the occasional trespasser. But this wasn't the kind of threat wood and nails could stop. "How close are we talking?" he asked. Valeria's glowing eyes narrowed, focusing on the tree line beyond the cabin. "They're not walking," she said, almost in a whisper. "They're stalking, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike." Lucas's stomach churned. He didn't need an alien to tell him they were being hunted. He could feel it too. Every instinct screamed for him to run, but he knew it was useless. "If they're here, they already know about the cabin," he said. "Running just means we'll get picked off." Valeria winced as she tried to move, her body still too weak from her injuries. "You don't understand," she said. "Hunters don't miss. They're patient, precise. They'll draw you out, wear you down, and when you have no strength left, they'll take what they came for." Lucas stopped pacing and stared at her. "What exactly are we dealing with here? I need details, not just scary warnings." She hesitated, her sharp fangs catching the faint light as she spoke. "Hunters are elite. Faster, stronger, and equipped with weapons your planet has never seen. They're relentless because they're programmed to be. But their greatest strength is their discipline. They don't rush. They study, adapt, and strike when you least expect it." Lucas set his jaw. "Great, so they're perfect killing machines. Sounds like we're screwed." Before Valeria could respond, a faint hum filled the cabin. It started low, like a distant vibration, and grew steadily louder. Lucas turned toward the window, his heart pounding. The forest was glowing. Dim pulses of red and blue light danced through the trees, casting eerie shadows that flickered across the walls. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. Valeria's face hardened. "They're drones. They send them first to map the area and scan for weaknesses. If we destroy them, they'll know where we are for sure. If we don't." She didn't finish the sentence, but Lucas understood. The drones were hurting them. Lucas grabbed a thick blanket from a nearby chair and threw it over the window. "Stay out of sight," he said. "If they don't know how many of us are here, it might buy us time." Valeria hesitated, but nodded, pulling herself into the corner of the room. "You're risking too much," she said softly. "They won't stop." Lucas forced a small smile, though his grip on the rifle tightened. "Good thing I'm stubborn, then." The hum grew louder, almost deafening now, as 3 small drones hovered into view. Each one was no bigger than a basketball, but their sleek, metallic frames glinted menacingly in the moonlight. Pulsing red lights scanned the cabin, and faint blue beams mapped the ground around it. Lucas crouched by the door, his breathing shallow. "Do they have a weakness?" he whispered. Valeria's voice came from the corner, calm despite the fear in her eyes. "The sensors. They rely on heat and movement. If you overload them, it disrupts their targeting." Lucas grinned despite himself. "Overload them, huh? I might have something for that." He reached into a dusty crate near the door, pulling out a small device with wires and a blinking light. One of his old inventions, an EMP generator he built years ago to ward off nosy drones from nearby towns. "This should scramble their circuits long enough to buy us a minute." Valeria's eyes widened slightly. "You made that?" Lucas smirked. "You're not the only one with tricks." Before she could respond, the drone's hum shifted pitch. Their lights locked onto the cabin, and a sharp beam cut through the wooden wall, leaving a glowing scorch mark behind. Lucas didn't wait. He flicked the switch on the EMP and tossed it out the door. A burst of blue light exploded across the clearing. The drones wobbled mid-air, their lights flickering, before dropping to the ground with a metallic thud. The hum stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Lucas exhaled slowly, his hands still trembling. "That's round 1, he muttered. "Now what?" Valeria's expression darkened. "Now they know we're here," she said, "and they'll come themselves." As if on cue, a deep mechanical roar echoed through the forest. The ground trembled, and in the distance, the faint outline of figures emerged. Tall, armored, and moving with deadly precision. The hunters had arrived in force. An unlikely bond. The cabin was silent except for the faint crackling of a dying fire. The hunters had paused their assault, their tactics shifting. Lucas knew they were regrouping, calculating their next move. He sat cross-legged on the floor, tinkering with a pile of wires and metal scraps, his hands moving with purpose. Across from him, Valeria leaned against the wall, her glowing red eyes watching him with quiet intensity. "You're surprisingly calm for someone being hunted by aliens," she said, her voice soft but edged with curiosity. Lucas didn't look up. "When you've lived alone in the woods for as long as I have, you get used to dealing with unexpected visitors. Bears, wolves, now alien vampires. What's the difference?" Valeria's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile, but it faded quickly. "I'm not like them, you know," she said, her tone serious. "I didn't choose this life." Lucas finally looked up, setting down the makeshift weapon he was building. "You said your kind feeds on life, on blood, but you don't seem too eager to hurt anyone. Why's that?" Her gaze dropped to the floor, a shadow crossing her face. "Because I've seen what it does. My people, our hunger consumes more than just energy. It takes everything. Compassion, kindness, empathy. It leaves nothing but hunger." Lucas leaned back, his expression softening. "But you're different." Valeria nodded slowly. "I refuse to feed the way they do. I found ways to survive on the fringes of society, taking only what I needed without harming anyone. But that made me a traitor. To the hunters, I'm a weakness, a stain on their idea of perfection." Lucas studied her for a moment, the glow of the firelight reflecting in her otherworldly eyes. "You risked everything to live by your own rules," he said. "That's not weakness. That's strength." For a moment, Valeria said nothing. The weight of her past hung between them, unspoken but heavy. Then she looked at him, her expression softening. "And you? Why live out here, away from your own kind?" Lucas hesitated. It wasn't a story he liked telling, but something about Valeria made him feel less guarded. The world out there, it's loud, messy. People never stop wanting things. Money, power, attention. I wanted something simpler. A place where I could just exist without all that noise. Valeria tilted her head, her sharp features softening. "And yet you didn't hesitate to help me, even when you didn't understand what I was." Lucas shrugged, picking up his tools again. I guess I'm not as much of a loner as I thought. A comfortable silence settled over the cabin as Lucas continued working. Valeria watched him, her exhaustion evident, but her curiosity keeping her awake. She hadn't expected this, a human who didn't fear her, who treated her as more than just a predator or a threat. After a while, Lucas held up his creation, a crude but functional trap made from parts of his old inventions. It's not much, he said, but it'll give us a fighting chance. If they come through the front door, this should give them a shock they won't forget. Valeria smiled faintly. You're resourceful, more than most humans I've encountered. Lucas raised an eyebrow. You've met other humans. Her smile faded. Not like this. Always at a distance, always hiding. I couldn't risk getting close. But you? She paused, searching for the right words. You're different. Lucas laughed softly. Guess we're both misfits in our own way. Their brief moment of connection was interrupted by a sudden sound outside, a low, guttural growl that made the hairs on Lucas's neck stand up. Valeria's eyes snapped toward the window, her body tensing. They're testing us, she said, her voice low. Seeing how strong we are, how far we'll go to survive. Lucas grabbed his rifle, his jaw tightening. Then they're about to find out. Valeria reached out, stopping him. Lucas, you don't have to do this. They're here for me. If I go to them, they might spare you. Lucas shook his head, his grip on the rifle firm. Not a chance. We've come this far, and I'm not about to let you give up now. Valeria stared at him, something shifting in her expression. For so long, she had believed that her kind and humans were too different to coexist. But here was this human, ordinary in so many ways yet extraordinary in his determination, risking his life for hers. Then we fight together, she said, her voice steady. Lucas nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Now you're talking. The growls outside grew louder, joined by the metallic hum of the hunter's weapons charging. Lucas and Valeria exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and fighting enemies far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. But in that moment, they weren't just prey. They were a team. And the hunters had no idea what was waiting for them. The revelation. The forest was unnervingly silent. Lucas crouched behind the thick trunk of a tree, his breath shallow and rifle ready. Beside him, Valeria moved like a shadow, her glowing red eyes scanning the darkness. She was still weak, but the tension in her movements told him she was preparing for something. Something big. They had spent the last hour dodging the hunters, retreating deeper into the woods as the alien bounty hunters tightened their noose. Lucas knew they couldn't keep running. They needed a plan, something that would turn the tide in their favor. But right now, survival came first. Over there, Valeria whispered, pointing toward a faint metallic gleam in the distance. That's one of their scouts. Lucas squinted, spotting the small drone hovering just above the treetops. It moved methodically, its sensors scanning every inch of the forest floor. He tightened his grip on the rifle. I can take it down, he said, but it'll only buy us time. Valeria hesitated. Don't, she said softly. Destroying it will confirm our location. We need to find their command unit, the heart of their operation. That's our only chance. Lucas frowned. Command unit? What are you talking about? Valeria glanced at him, her expression a mix of urgency and guilt. Their ship, she said. It's hidden nearby. I can feel its presence. If we can reach it, I can disable their systems, maybe even force them to retreat. But what? Lucas pressed. She hesitated again, her gaze dropping. There's something you need to know, something I should have told you earlier. Lucas's stomach tightened. Now's not exactly the best time for secrets, Valeria. She exhaled slowly, as if bracing herself. The hunters aren't just after me because I'm a traitor. They're here because of what I'm carrying. Lucas raised an eyebrow. What you're carrying? Valeria nodded, her hand moving to a small device strapped to her waist. It was sleek and unassuming, but the way she touched it, like it was the most precious thing in the universe, made Lucas uneasy. "This," she said, "is what remains of my world. It's a data core, a repository of my people's knowledge, culture, history. Everything that was lost when my planet was destroyed is stored in here." Lucas stared at the device, a sinking feeling in his chest. "And the hunters want it. They want to erase it," Valeria said, her voice laced with pain. "To them, it's a threat. Proof that someone defied their ways, that not all of us are monsters. If they destroy this, my people's legacy will be gone forever." Lucas ran a hand through his hair, the weight of the situation settling in. "So you're telling me we're not just fighting for our lives. We're fighting to protect the last piece of an entire civilization." Valeria met his gaze, her red eyes glowing with determination. "Yes, and if they get it, they'll use the knowledge to target your planet next. Earth will become another victim of their hunger." Lucas let out a bitter laugh. "Great. No pressure." Before Valeria could respond, a faint hum filled the air. Both of them froze. The sound wasn't like the drones. It was deeper, more ominous. Valeria's eyes widened. "They've deployed the enforcers," she whispered. "We're running out of time." Lucas glanced around, his mind racing. "All right," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "We find their ship, you disable their systems, and we figure out the rest as we go." Valeria nodded, a small flicker of hope breaking through her fear. "Follow me," she said, her voice firm. "I can lead us there." As they moved through the forest, the hum grew louder, accompanied by faint flashes of light in the distance. Lucas's instincts screamed at him to turn back, but he pushed forward, his trust in Valeria outweighing his fear. Finally, they'd reached a clearing. In the center, partially cloaked by shimmering camouflage, stood the hunter's ship. It was sleek and predatory, its metallic surface pulsating with faint red light. Valeria stopped, her expression unreadable. "That's it," she said quietly. "The command unit. If we can reach the core, I can override their systems." Lucas studied the ship, his mind already mapping out a plan. "Let's hope your people aren't as good at building locks as they are at hunting." Valeria allowed herself a faint smile. "They're better," she said. "But I've learned a few tricks." Lucas nodded, his heart pounding. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was a battle for something far bigger, for Valeria's people, for Earth, and for a chance to prove that even in the darkest corners of the universe, there was still hope. "All right," he said, gripping his rifle. "Let's finish this." The final stand. The clearing was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of the hunter's ship. Its metallic surface shimmered under the moonlight, like a predator lying in wait. Lucas crouched behind a fallen tree, his breath steady but shallow. Next to him, Valeria's glowing red eyes were fixed on the ship, her expression unreadable. "Once we're inside, we won't have much time," she whispered. Her voice was calm, but Lucas could sense the weight behind her words. "The ship's core is protected by an energy barrier. I can disable it, but they'll know the moment we breach the hull." Lucas adjusted the strap on his rifle, his jaw tightening. "So, we're walking into a trap." "It's the only way," Valeria said. She glanced at him, her pale face illuminated by the faint red glow from the ship. "You don't have to do this, Lucas. I can handle it alone." Lucas shook his head, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "You're really bad at convincing me to leave, you know that." Valeria allowed herself a small smile before turning her focus back to the ship. "We'll enter through the maintenance hatch," she said. "It's the weakest point. Once inside, I'll guide us to the core." "But Lucas," her voice faltered for a moment, "if something goes wrong, you have to promise me you'll get out. No matter what." Lucas met her gaze, his expression serious. "Not a chance. We're in this together." Before she could argue, the hum of the ship grew louder. A section of its hull began to shift, revealing a ramp that extended slowly to the ground. From the shadows, 3 figures emerged, their armor gleaming like polished steel. Each hunter carried a weapon that hummed with deadly energy, their movements precise and methodical. "They're searching the perimeter," Valeria said, her voice barely audible. "We have to move now." Lucas nodded, gripping his rifle tightly. Together, they slipped through the dense undergrowth, keeping low as they circled toward the back of the ship. The maintenance hatch was smaller than Lucas expected, barely large enough for a person to crawl through. Valeria moved first, her lithe frame slipping into the opening with ease. Lucas followed, his heart pounding as the confined space swallowed them. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of ozone and metal. The walls of the ship glowed faintly, veins of red light pulsing like a heartbeat. Valeria led the way, her movements fluid despite her lingering weakness. Lucas followed closely, his rifle at the ready. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, and Lucas's breath caught. The ship's core floated in the center, a sphere of pulsating energy encased in a translucent barrier. The room was empty, but Lucas knew better than to assume they were alone. Valeria approached the core, her hands moving quickly over a nearby console. "I can disable the barrier," she said, "but it will trigger an alarm. Once that happens, they'll come." Lucas positioned himself by the entrance, his eyes scanning the corridor. "How long do you need?" 2 minutes, she said, her fingers flying over the console. "Maybe less." "Make it 1," Lucas muttered, tightening his grip on the rifle. The moment Valeria deactivated the barrier, a deafening alarm filled the chamber. The ship's walls pulsed with red light, and the hum of the core grew louder, almost like a warning growl. Lucas spun around as the first hunter appeared in the corridor, its weapon raised. "Get down," he shouted, firing a shot. The bullet struck the hunter's armor, ricocheting harmlessly. The creature didn't hesitate, firing back with a bolt of energy that scorched the wall inches from Lucas's head. "They're here," Valeria called, her voice strained. "Just hold them off." Lucas gritted his teeth, ducking behind a console as another hunter entered the room. He fired again, aiming for the exposed joints in the armor. This time, the shot hit its mark, and the hunter staggered, its weapon clattering to the floor. More footsteps echoed in the corridor, and Lucas realized they were outnumbered. "Valeria, whatever you're doing, do it faster." "I'm almost there," she shouted, her hands glowing faintly as she interfaced with the console. "Just a little longer." The next wave of hunters didn't come alone. A mechanical drone hovered into the chamber, its sensors locking onto Lucas. He barely had time to dive for cover before it fired a burst of plasma, the heat singing his arm. "Enough of this," he muttered, pulling a small device from his pocket. It was another one of his makeshift gadgets, a compact EMP grenade. He armed it and threw it toward the drone. The resulting pulse sent the machine crashing to the floor in a shower of sparks. "Done," Valeria cried. The barrier around the core vanished, leaving the pulsating sphere exposed. But the hunters weren't backing down. One of them lunged toward her, its blade slicing through the air. Lucas didn't think, he acted. He threw himself between Valeria and the hunter, the blade grazing his shoulder as he fired his rifle point blank. The hunter fell, but Lucas staggered, blood seeping from the wound. "Lucas!" Valeria's voice was filled with panic, but he waved her off. "Finish it," he said through gritted teeth. "Don't stop." Valeria turned back to the core, placing her hands against its surface. Her body glowed faintly as she poured her energy into it, her eyes blazing with determination. The core pulsed violently, its light growing brighter until it filled the entire chamber. The ship trembled, the lights flickering as Valeria's power overwhelmed the system. The hunters froze, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. One by one, they collapsed, their weapons falling silent. Valeria stepped back, her breathing labored. "It's done," she said, her voice barely audible. "The ship is disabled. They can't harm anyone now." Lucas sank to the floor, his vision swimming. "Good," he said with a weak smile, "because I'm pretty sure I'm out of bullets." Valeria knelt beside him, her glowing eyes filled with concern. "You saved me again," she said softly. "Why?" Lucas managed a chuckle, even as the pain in his shoulder throbbed. "I told you. We're in this together. Redemption." The world was quiet again, but it wasn't the peaceful stillness of the forest. It was the heavy, unnatural silence of aftermath. The hunter's ship lay dormant in the clearing, its once menacing hum replaced by the faint crackle of sparks from its fractured core. The air smelled of scorched metal and ozone. Lucas sat on the ground, leaning against a tree, his bloodied shoulder crudely bandaged with scraps of cloth. Every breath felt like fire in his lungs, but he wasn't about to complain, not when Valeria stood a few feet away, her glowing red eyes fixed on the lifeless ship. She had done it. Against impossible odds, she had turned the tide. But the victory hadn't come without a cost. "You okay?" Lucas asked, his voice rough but steady. Valeria turned to him, her pale face illuminated by the faint glow of the ship's failing lights. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of exhaustion and something deeper, regret, maybe. "They're gone," she said softly. "The hunters are deactivated. Their systems are beyond repair." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "And the ship? It's crippled. They can't leave, can't call for reinforcements. But it's more than that." She paused, looking back at the ship. "I destroyed their core. Without it, the knowledge they carried, their weapons, their tactics, their history, it's all gone. Erased." Lucas frowned. "I thought that knowledge was dangerous. Isn't that what they used to wipe out your world?" "It was," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "But it was also ours, the last piece of my people's legacy. And now it's gone too." Lucas struggled to his feet, using the tree for support. "You didn't have a choice, Valeria. If they'd gotten their hands on Earth." He trailed off, gesturing to the quiet forest around them. "It wouldn't have stood a chance." Valeria's eyes softened. "I know," she said quietly, "but that doesn't make it any easier." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of what they had just survived settling over them. Lucas glanced at her, noticing the way her shoulders sagged, the faint tremble in her hands. She had won, but the victory had come at a personal cost he couldn't fully understand. "You're not alone, you know," he said suddenly. "Your people might be gone, but that doesn't mean their story ends here. You're still here. That means something." Valeria turned to him, her glowing eyes meeting his. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Maybe you're right," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Maybe there's still a way to honor them." Lucas grinned, wincing as the movement pulled at his injured shoulder. "There's the spirit. Besides, you're stuck with me now. Someone's got to keep you out of trouble." Valeria laughed softly, the sound surprising both of them. "You're the one who keeps charging headfirst into danger," she said. "Maybe I'm the one keeping you out of trouble." "Fair point," Lucas admitted. He gestured to the wrecked ship. "So, what now? You've stopped the hunters, but what happens next?" Valeria's expression grew thoughtful. "The ship's beacon is still active. Other factions might pick up the signal. We need to destroy it before it draws more attention. And then—" She hesitated, looking out at the forest. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've spent so long running, hiding. Maybe it's time to stop, to figure out what comes next." Lucas nodded, understanding. "Well, you've got a place here," he said, "if you want it. This forest could use a guardian, and I could use I don't know, partner in crime." Valeria smiled, a genuine warmth lighting up her face. "I like the sound of that." The two of them turned back to the ship, its once terrifying presence now reduced to smoldering wreckage. Together, they walked toward it, ready to finish what they had started. Valeria reached out, her glowing hands already gathering energy for the final blow. As the ship's beacon flickered out, Lucas looked at her, a strange sense of calm settling over him. He didn't know what the future held. For her, for him, or for Earth. But for the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't facing it alone. And in the quiet aftermath of chaos, that was enough.